Episode 158 of CppCast with guest Guy Davidson, recorded July 12th, 2018. This episode of CppCast is sponsored by Backtrace, the turnkey debugging platform that helps you spend less time debugging and more time building. Get to the root cause quickly with detailed information at your fingertips. Start your free trial at backtrace.io/CppCast. In this episode, we discuss Visual Studio updates and conference news. Then we talk to Guy Davidson from Creative Assembly. Guy talks to us about the future of the 2D graphics proposal after Rapperswil. Welcome to episode 158 of CppCast, the first podcast for C++ developers by C++ developers. I'm your host, Rob Irving, joined by my co-host, Jason Turner. Jason, how you doing today?
I'm okay, Rob. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. You still a little under the weather, though?
Yeah, working on it. But I still can't help but laugh every single time you say the first podcast for C++ developers.
Had to change it up. Well,
you should change it to like the best podcast. No, maybe not.
It just seems mean. Yeah. Anyway, at the top of our episode, I'd like to read a piece of feedback. This week, we got an email from Leslie. She wrote in, "Hello, Rob and Jason. Thank you for the great podcast. I never listened to podcasts before. Then I discovered CppCast about 2 months ago and listen to it whenever I have a meal alone. I'm curious if you can spend one episode talking about graphics programming. It will be cool to have a guest like Peter Shirley or Eric Lenge. I want to know how someone with the college of graphics course should continue to learn graphics." So we do not have Peter or Eric on today, but we'll have to look into them as possible future guests. But we are definitely going to be talking about graphics today, right, Jason?
I would think so.
Yeah. Well, we should just go ahead and get to our guest. But we'd love to hear your thoughts about the show as well. You can always reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, or email us at feedback@cppcast.com. And don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes. Joining us again today is Guy Davidson. Guy is the coding manager of Creative Assembly, makers of the Total War franchise, Alien Isolation, and Halo Wars 2. Guy has been writing games since the early 1980s. He is also now a contributor to SG14, the study group devoted to low latency, real-time requirements, and performance efficiency, especially for games, financial banking, and simulations. He speaks at schools, colleges, and universities about programming and likes to help good programmers become better programmers. Guy, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me back. Good to be here.
I'm curious. Maybe we'll dig into this more later, but I think this is a good time to ask. How did you end up volunteering for SG14, getting involved? What was the decision to do that?
Well, let's see. A few years ago, I booked Scott Myers to come and do training for the Creative Assembly to upgrade all the programmers to C++14, so that we were all, in the same place. And Scott,
you upgrade the programmers, not the compilers.
The compilers were already upgraded, and the programmers were using features in unusual ways, shall we say? So it seemed appropriate to. It was exciting, and it seemed appropriate to upgrade the programmers as well as the compilers. And it worked. It worked very well. He did a really good 3 days of training. Very tiring, exhausting 3 days of training, but we all came out better for it. And I was chatting with him about the language and things like that. And he spoke to me about standardization and said, "Hey, there's this group called SG14, and you should get onto that and, do stuff. And we really need games representation on the committee." And I went, the committee, the what, the where now? And after a bit of research and goodness knows how long, reading so much, just so much reading, I thought this actually could be something I could, usefully contribute to. And also, I used to be a missionary long ago, and I'm not anymore. But one of the things that I missed was I've always loved theology and the accurate interpretation of text and things like that, and the discussing And basically, tweaking the standard really hits that kind of same missionary theology. It tickles me in the same way. So I really love being involved in the standard.
Awesome.
Yeah, every now and then in interactions with people, there, sometimes it comes up like about me personally, like you seem pretty pedantic, basically, and I'm like, well, I don't think I would be a C++ developer if I wasn't.
Indeed,
right?
Indeed. And actually, you know what? There's no pedantry at all in the C++ standard. It's all absolutely necessary. There's no unnecessary nitpicking. We have to, minimize ambiguity and maximize clarity. And sometimes that clarity comes at the cost of minimizing ambiguity. And that's when people go, oh, come on, did you need to say that, really? And we have to say, yes, we did, because you might have done this, and that would be dreadful. And there's this kind of moment from people. And people, nobody reads the standard. Well, very, very few people read the standard. Lots of people use compilers, but very few people actually. That's our job. Our job is to read the standard and make it good so that you guys don't have to worry about it.
Right.
Okay. Well, Guy, we got a couple of news articles to discuss. Feel free to comment on any of these, and then we'll start talking to you more about the standard and more about the graphics proposal. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, so this first one, we got 2 articles from the Visual C++ blog. I feel like they've been posting a lot lately. And this first one is MSVC preprocessor progress towards conformance. And I'm not sure if I was really aware that the preprocessor was, non-conformant. I mean, we've talked about lots of non-conformance issues with the Microsoft C++ compiler, but I'm not sure if the preprocessor was something that was on my radar. How about you, Jason?
I think this is largely what's alluded to when people make comments about Visual Studio's compiler not being C99 compliant. Mm-hmm. A lot of that was from the preprocessor.
Yeah. Okay. I must say, looking at that blog post actually made me feel faintly queasy and slightly filthy, and not in a good way. I've always. Well, there's that kind of delight when you do something really quite cunning and dreadful, and you think, oh, I hate the poor person who's going to have to read this later, but it works a treat, and it's really compact and lovely. And so, quite often I'll enjoy writing code like that, and then trying to document it for those who follow me, which is usually myself, I suppose. I've always felt that macro gubbins was a bit of a fail, really. I thought, use a function template or something like that. But having said that, I do actually do some quite, slightly nifty things with macros. I've got a finite state machine lurking around somewhere, and compile time string jiggery pokery and so on. The preprocessor isn't going anywhere. Try as we might, we're always going to have hash include. Better conformance is good. It's a mantra. It's obviously a fine thing. But reading this blog post, there were some really strange things that I thought, what is this? This is extraordinary. We kind of forget about the preprocessor, I think. Probably for the good.
One of these things in here, which I feel like I'm supposed to know something about, but it looks like they're dealing with C++ 20 conformance for the preprocessor, which means they've actually changed something in the preprocessor for C++ 20.
Ooh.
Which was that?
Well, I know that
there's this graph in the middle, progress at a glance, and in the bottom left, C++ 20 coming soon, and it's about the expansion of variadic arguments with optional comments.
Oh, that,
in a macro, right.
Yeah, that looks exciting, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. I'm going to wait and see what happens there. I'm not really up to speed on the on the preprocessor at all, as I said. I really don't use it very much. But yes, conformance is good.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that a few more times.
Definitely good. And then this other article we have from Visual C++ is something I'm wondering if you use, Guy, support for Unity builds in Visual Studio. And this is something that's kind of widely used in the gaming community, right? These Unity builds, putting everything in one large file.
Absolutely. Well, it's not just the gaming community. I think whenever a code base starts getting really large, people think, do you know what? I could just meld all these files together into one giant pre-processed behemoth, and then just compile it all at once and benefit from the the per translation unit optimizations available to me. It was a bit of a whiskey tango foxtrot moment when I saw this. It was, we do use Unity. Our code base is large. It's larger than most probably. And actually, I've invested considerable time on our build solution with Premake and FastBuild. FastBuild is a distributed build system. I've always been using it, but it generates Unity files and then sends them around the network. And certainly, if Visual Studio decides they're going to natively support distributed builds as well as Unity files, I think that's a lot of problems solved. Maybe that's where we should be concentrating rather than on modules if we're trying to speed up builds. Controversial, but it really does work. having Unity files and having distributed builds. We've got, I think, the entire Total War solution takes about 6 3/4 hours to build. Although,
oh wow,
yeah, with FastBuild I can get it done in under 3 or 4 minutes.
Wow. So
Unity builds great, distribution great. So that's your next thing, Visual Studio, is distribution, because it's never enough, never ever. We'd like more, please, more.
So I was recently reading about Unity builds. Actually, I think this was just last week or so. And they pointed out that you don't have to put every single thing in one giant file. That if you are building for an 8-core machine or distributed or something, then you can split it up into like 10 different Unity builds and then link all those things together at the end or
Indeed.
Whatever. Is that
That's one of the
similar
things
to what?
Yeah, we have to do that. Otherwise, we run out of memory.
Okay.
Right. We've got many lines of code. Let's see, how many have we got? About 3.5 bajillion lines of code in our.
That's a lot.
It's a lot, actually. It really is quite a lot of code. We have run out of memory on 32-bit Visual Studio during compilation phase and during the linking phase. So we do have to say, okay, break up this project into 65 Unity files, and they should all build in time. And if we run out of memory, say, okay, split it up into 66 Unity files, please.
Is that something you need to kind of keep tweaking constantly, your build engineers? Yeah.
That's my job. That's what I do. And it's great fun, actually. I love it. Unity builds do come with complications. For example, anonymous namespaces, that's a problem. If you've got an anonymous namespace that says, all right, everything's just local to this translation unit, if suddenly your translation unit is melded together with a load of other translation units, then suddenly you'll get symbol collisions. People put lots of tiny variable names. Oh, I've got a temporary variable here. I'll call it J, and they'll stick it in their anonymous namespace, and they'll think, no one's ever going to use that. And then, obviously, 2 translation units get melded together. You have 2 variables called J. Everything falls over. And you need to do things like declare another namespace inside your anonymous namespace, and it starts getting complicated. Or just don't use anonymous namespaces. Just don't. Much easier.
Wow, that's if part of the reason for doing the Unity builds is to take advantage of the translation unit optimizations, like you were saying, and it seems like, if you are splitting 1,000 files into 66 different Unity builds, then there's a lot of different permutations that could result in different performance of the actual binary in the end.
Yeah, it's insane. It really is. How much time would you like to spend permuting and testing? That's really what it boils down to. And to be honest, the answer is, well, not much really. Right. You say 1,000 files. I'm not kidding. We've got tens of thousands of files and millions of lines of code. And we have to split it up. If there is a 64-bit Visual Studio which will compile all our one giant humongous the mother of all Unity files, then that might work. But actually, we split up our projects our solution into various projects to get around the fact that we don't want to have to compile all the files every time.
Right.
This offers us plenty of potential. Unity files offer you plenty of potential. You do have to use them correctly. It's not a silver bullet by any stretch.
Now, I am just curious about one last question with the Unity builds. Do you still apply LTO on top of that?
Yeah, we do. We're still linking lots of stuff together. So we turn it up. We turn on everything. Everything is turned up to 11 because it has to run as fast as possible. So anything that looks like it might help, we'll throw it in, test it, see what happens. Is the additional compilation or link time worth it? Generally, yes, it is.
Wow. So you turn on all the things, and most of the things do something useful, and you keep going.
Yeah. Compiler technology is amazing. It really is amazing. Hats off to, I like to think I'm not too shabby a programmer, but I look at the people putting compilers together and I'm thinking, I'm not worthy. This is just amazing stuff that people are doing here.
And now that you're involved in the committee, you get to tell them to do even crazier things.
Yes, I do. Well, suggest. I don't get to tell. I get to offer my vote along with the other 150 people or however many are there at the time.
Right.
Okay, well, we now have just a little bit of conference news. The first one is an announcement from Meeting C++. They're now going to have student and support tickets, or they're announcing student support tickets for this year. So you can go ahead and register for those. Is this new, or did they have this last year? Do you remember, Jason?
He did some version of this for the last several years, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, this is great. I'm actually at the Andals Hotel right now, home of Meeting C++. I'm here with my wife to see Nick Cave. But, we love the Andals Hotel. I actually came here a couple of years before the first Meeting C++, and it's a great venue. And Jens has done an amazing job over the years of putting Meeting C++ together, and I'm delighted that he's, doing his absolute best to get as many people in as possible. This is just another example of his general loveliness. Frankly, he's a fabulous human being.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then the last announcement is CppCon 2018 call for poster submissions, and the deadline for this is August 3rd. So,
yeah, if you're working on something interesting and didn't submit a talk, or you didn't have your talk accepted but still want to talk about your project, submit something, see what happens.
Yeah. They're an interesting discipline, poster competitions. I can drone on at you for an hour talking about pushing pixels around a screen, or how to correctly define a class template member template function out of line, or how much ice cream you can stuff inside a trumpet or something like that. But the posters are much more immediate, and they're much more challenging for it. Just being able to, at a glance, to say, there we are, it's all there. Read that poster, just look at it. There we are. Have you got it? Yes, great, brilliant. Move on to the next one. It's really concentrated stuff.
I've never considered how much ice cream I could stuff into a trumpet.
Have you ever learned integral calculus?
Oh, yes. Sure.
Yeah, there we are. Create a trumpet by rotating a curve around the x-axis, and it creates a volume. And one way of looking at that is saying, well, here's a useful application. How much ice cream can you stuff inside this trumpet? And then what you do is you work out I don't know why I said ice cream inside a trumpet. I'm sorry, but you rotate the curve around the x, you get the volume, and say, I can stuff 2.3 litres of Cherry Garcia ice cream into this trumpet. Good. Would you like me to do that now? No? Great, good. All right, well, I won't.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Maybe you want to edit this out. I don't know.
Okay. Well, on that note, for the last few weeks, we've been talking about the Rapperswil trip meeting. It seems like a lot happened at that ISO standards meeting. And we have talked about the news that there was no consensus to move forward with the graphics proposal. And I want to know if we could start off by you giving us your take on how all of that went.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing to say is that history is made by those who turn up and vote. The committee isn't a single body of people. It's not 150 people who sit in a room and who take it in turns to say their piece, and then we all just, it splits up into groups. There's all sorts of work going on in all sorts of rooms and all sorts of teams, and any two consecutive committees will almost certainly not have the same set of people there. So it really is just a rolling group of people who are trying to push a consensus forward for how the language should look. And these are the rules of the International Standards Organization that publish the standard. So what some people might think is a really great idea one meeting might seem like a poor idea to people the next meeting. The graphics proposal has been a controversial proposal. For one thing, it's really large. Revision 8, which we published just after the Rapperswil meeting, is now a shade under 200 pages. And if you've looked at the standard, you'll know that 200 pages is. That's a humongous amount of work. It's a huge amount of work.
That's like 20% of the standard, pretty much. 15% at least.
10, probably 10% by the time 20 comes out. But yeah, it's. I think the standard's running at 1,600 pages now, but it's a lot. It's a big chunk of it. And also, this is before we even tackled text and keyboard and mouse and touch and controller input and all that sort of thing. So, it's a big thing, and it's quite a scary thing. But we have had, continuous support for 5 years. So, we continued, on the expectation that eventually it would get in there. But, in Toronto last year, there was, murmurings about it being a bit large, and certainly at Jacksonville, it was quite, I was expecting to say, right, the paper's good to go, we can publish the TS, and that was not the feeling of the Library Evolution Working Group, who are the part of the committee looking at this. Certainly at Rapperswil, a simple counter-proposal was made. And as far as I could tell, it was only a subset of hours of the standing proposal. But there was toing and froing between, what would work, what would be a good idea. And as the session wore on, it became clear that it was just getting mired in uncertainty and doubt, and, the consensus wasn't arrived at. And it was decided, well, let's just set this aside. We might pick it up later. I don't know. Well, I say we, the committee might pick it up later. But I don't know. There's all sorts of approaches that the committee could take. It's still, the desire of the direction group to have 2D graphics in C++, but, the direction group has no more authority than the rest of the committee. They don't give a binding direction as to how things should proceed. They simply say, do you know what, this would be a good idea. But, the committee didn't agree in this case.
I'm kind of curious. You said it had been in the works for about 5 years. Do you why did it take 5 years to get to where you were? And do you think if somehow it would have moved faster, there would have been less controversy? Well,
that's a very interesting question. It took 5 years. First of all, it took 5 years because it's a big thing. It's easy to say, yeah, 2D graphics, that's great. That's like drawing stuff and drawing lines and curves and easy, done. Job done, lovely. But actually wording it unambiguously is a big task, which is why it's 200 pages long. The paper was probably first actually ready to go after about 2 years, but I think one of the problems was that there was feature creep. There was no, properly specified, it should do this at the front. And if there had been, then we would have known if the committee was pulling us in different places. In one of the papers that I wrote describing the history of the graphics proposal, I did, raise this point that feature creep is going to kill us, and that certainly between 2015 and 2018, it was very much a case of iterate, tweak, iterate, tweak, iterate, tweak. And there was a point where the reason why I wanted to publish a TS, and why Mike McLaughlin wanted to publish it, and can I just say right at the outset that Mike McLaughlin is actually the lead author on this. I joined in about 18 months ago, 21 months ago, but Mike he's done just most of the work, nearly all the work. But the reason why we wanted to publish a TS was because then it becomes harder for people to say, oh, can we just change this? And then wander off. When something is published as a TS, if you want to make changes, you have to submit a proposal with fresh wording. And there's nothing like wording to slow people down and make them think again. When they actually have to say precisely what it is they mean, people slow down, they consider, and then they think, oh, actually, maybe that's not such a great idea, or maybe this idea isn't sufficiently valuable to justify all the effort required for changing the wording. Of course, it wasn't published as a TS, and I said in the meeting at Rapperswil that this backing and forthing isn't serving anyone at all. It's not serving the committee. It's not serving the proposal. We're kind of at the stage where we need to publish this and be formal about changes, or we'll never get anywhere.
Right.
So if you could kind of go back in time a bit, you would have maybe tried to publish it as a TS a lot earlier to slow down the feature creep?
Well, if I could go back in time, I would have listened to Beeman Dawes. He wrote a very interesting paper shortly after the graphics paper was announced, or the graphics effort was announced, the graphics proposal was announced. And he said, this needs to be done quickly. We need to prevent feature creep. It's too big a feature to be designed by committee. He said all of these things. And I only found this paper, really just a few weeks ago. And I was reading this and just tearing my hair out and wandering around the house with my mouth open going, why on earth did we not listen to Beeman? Why we seem to have ignored this? I don't know how that
For people who don't know who Beeman is, he's been around for a long time.
He's father of Boost, isn't he? Retired from he's retired from the committee for age reasons, I suppose.
But he has the experience to know that something like this, to know what you were going to hit. That is,
he really does. He spotted everything right at the outset. So I'm kind of grateful that he did, but I just wish I'd done more reading around before I plunged in.
Right.
So, what do you see as the future of the 2D graphics proposal today?
Well, I still believe there's a need for 2D graphics in the standard. Something needs to happen. The proposal itself is still in the review queue. Revision 8 is good to go. That's where we are at the moment. That's everything for graphics except for text and input, which sounds like quite a big omission. But at some point you do have to publish and get going. The fact that it's in the review queue means that the Library Evolution Working Group could carry on looking at it and forward it to the Library Working Group. But since there's no consensus to spend any more time on it at the moment, then that's not going to happen. Text and input could be handled by the host operating system explicitly, but it's not going to happen. But I think it's time for the long game. Clearly, this is the end of the beginning, but I don't think it's the end of the proposal by any stretch.
Okay. And I think you had a bit of an announcement you wanted to share with us?
Well, at the end of the Rapperswil meeting, my national body, which is the British Standards Institute, the BSI, were quite upset that there was no forward progress. My national body was unanimous in support for the graphics proposal, and we realised, actually, we could publish our own TS. So on July the 9th, the BSI C++ panel unanimously voted to create a work item towards the publication of a 2D graphics TS. If you look in BS0, which is British Standard 0, the paper on the standard for standardization, if you like, in section 3.45, it describes a technical specification, TS, as a document published by ISO or the IEC or the CEN or the CEN, ELEC, they're about electricity and electronics and all that sort of thing, about which there is the possibility of future approval as a standard, but for which at present there are reasons precluding immediate publication as a standard. Typically the reasons for this would be that the required support for such approval cannot be obtained, or there is doubt on whether consensus has been achieved, or the subject matter is still under technical development. So this work will be published by the BSI. Many other national bodies do want to see it published. I've been approached personally by the heads of several national bodies and said, we're sorry about this. We'd actually like to see this happen. We have wording experts in the BSI. We've got people like Alistair Meredith. We've got implementation experts. We've got Jonathan Wakely, who implements libc C++. He's looked at it and said, well, this is pretty much good to go. So this TS should be the same quality and utility as a regular ISO TS.
So what does this mean from a practical standpoint if several different national bodies have this TS, but it's not in the standard?
Well, if it's not in the standard, that means that an implementer doesn't have to implement it. The thing is, the wording is the key. This is the difficult part of a proposal, writing the wording. People say, why didn't you standardize skier? And I will look at them bleakly and say, why don't you do that? Why don't you go away and write the wording, and I'll see you in 2026, and we'll take a look at it, shall we? So what it really means is we'll be publishing the document, and it will be available for implementers. I mean, first, obviously, I'll be correcting the spelling. Colour will be spelled COLOUR, that sort of thing. But it's a stable reference document. That's the point, that implementers can use to implement the features. There's no requirement to ship it in Britain. It doesn't need to be shipped in Britain in your compilers. You don't need to have a British version of the compiler or anything like that. You only need to ship it if you actually want to be compliant with BSI, whatever the number is. And if anybody wants to implement the TS, they can. If Microsoft or Red Hat or anyone says, oh yeah, I think I'll implement that, they're able to, and they have all the wording necessary to do that. They don't have to be ISO compliant, compilers. Well, sorry, they do have to be ISO compliant, but they don't have to implement this TS to be ISO compliant. But the thing is, it might provide competitive differentiation or advantage for them to do so. They can say, well, look, my compiler's got this BSI with all this lovely 2D graphics available to you. So that might be a motivator. I wouldn't like to say, I'm certainly not in charge of the implementers. They're going to do what they choose, and they're going to spend their time and decide their priorities. As always. But the TS will sit in the BSI namespace. It's not going to bifurcate the standard or change the standard or introduce any kinds of problems like that. This will be the first entry in the BSI namespace. And actually, they could implement just part of it if they wanted. They might decide that the linear algebra is really useful, and so they'll say, "Oh, well, we'll add that." So we've got a standard linear algebra library in our implementation. I mean, as it stands, we have an implementation for the 3 desktop platforms and for iOS. It's sitting on our GitHub. It's raring to go for VC package, or you can download it from the repository and build it yourself if you like. We're on. If you go to io2d.org, that'll take you there. We've got plenty of samples. We've got cat pictures. We've got an asteroids clone. We've got an open map renderer. We've got Conway's Life. We've got all sorts of things. And also we'd like more. If anybody out there wants to write samples and wants to see their name in lights, we are open to pull requests. Our co-authors have worked really hard on getting this all working and getting this lovely for everyone. Actually, can I tell you about the team? I think their names need to be spoken out, because besides myself, so I've mentioned the lead author, Mike McLaughlin. He was a Microsoft C++ MVP. He's a DirectX and XNA person. And there's Michael Kazikoff. He's got 10 years of game dev experience, and he's got a degree in image processing. And he's again another image man. David Ludwig. He's got about 15 years of professional experience in game programming and production. Plenty of open source work. He's an occasional SDL2 contributor. Large chunks of the UWP code. We've got plenty of experience sitting in this, doing the business. And you should take a look, download it, build it, write some stuff, do some stuff. It's fun. It's quite simple. The idea of all of this was a simple 2D drawing library.
What would we actually search for to find this GitHub repository with the implementations?
Just go to io2d.org, and that'll direct you to the GitHub repository.
io2d.org.
io2d.org. We just registered it on Sunday.
Oh, okay. I wanted to interrupt this discussion for just a moment to bring you a word from our sponsors. Backtrace is a debugging platform that improves software quality, reliability, and support by bringing deep introspection and automation throughout the software error lifecycle. Spend less time debugging and reduce your mean time to resolution by using the first and only platform to combine symbolic debugging, error aggregation, and state analysis. At the time of error, Backtrace jumps into action, capturing detailed dumps of application and environmental state. Backtrace then performs automated analysis on process memory and executable code to classify errors and highlight important signals such as heap corruption, malware, and much more. This data is aggregated and archived in a centralized object store, providing your team a single system to investigate errors across your environments. Join industry leaders like Fastly, Message Systems, and AppNexus that use Backtrace to modernize their debugging infrastructure. It's free to try, minutes to set up, fully featured with no commitment necessary. Check them out at backtrace.io/CppCast. So I've read some of the opposition to the graphics proposal, and it seems like one of the things that they were opposed to was just spending committee resources, saying that, committee resources and time is very limited, which I understand. I think we only have one more meeting until they're calling feature freeze on C++20. Is one of the ideas of having this in the British standards that the British standards group could work on wording and things like that and maybe merge it back into the standard in the future where some of these wording issues might be already taken care of?
Yep, that could certainly happen. That would be my ideal outcome. I mean, obviously everything comes with an opportunity cost. We shouldn't be standardizing graphics because we don't have networking. We should be doing networking. It's all about priorities. It really is all about priorities. Everything you do means there's something else you can't do. And particularly, wording review is expensive. That's the secret sauce. That's the magic alchemy of the standardization process. Is getting the words right, getting rid of the ambiguity, minimizing it entirely. And making sure that everybody knows exactly how to implement a C++ compiler. Networking has been circling the airfield for ages and ages, and it looks like it's going to miss C++20. Unless there are some other out-of-band meetings taking place around CppCon to try and shove some things forward so that we can get executives working, we can get modules. There's extra work going on because we really want C++20 to feature these things. And networking is a big library feature, just like 2D graphics. Do you know what? Maybe it should go into a package manager. I don't know. The package management discussion is huge. And it's the same sort of thing, but networking seems to have more popularity and more traction than 2D graphics. But one of my concerns about package management is that there's an assumption that the wider community is just permitted to use third-party code. When I defended the graphics proposal, I asked people in the room, okay, who here is not allowed to use third-party code? And nobody raised their hands. And that astonished me. At Creative Assembly, we have very strict rules. It took me nearly 3 years to get libvpx into the code base for our video playback. 3 years. And many financial and governmental and commercial and industrial and medical and military code shops absolutely forbid third-party code, even Boost. I remember Herb talking about dark matter developers. I think most of them are in these kinds of environments. That all they've got is a compiler. They haven't got third-party libraries. They're not exposed to other programmers. And so they're not necessarily part of the community in the same way that lots of open source contributors are. I'm very concerned, personally, that a potential standard package manager would become a way of offloading the library from the standard, and that wouldn't serve that section of the community at all. It would possibly reduce the attractiveness of C++. People look at C# and think, look at all this stuff I can do right out of the box. A friend of mine who's a game dev has just moved to a new code shop that uses C# for all its tooling. He says, it's beautiful. He never wants to touch C++ again. And that's one of those, oh, God moments, because he's a really good C++ program, but he just can't be bothered anymore because he's used C# now, and it's good enough. It's good enough for tooling, for writing tools for game dev. We ignore this community at our peril. We may find ourselves, back in the wilderness again, like in the 2000s. I would be interested in commissioning some research into this to see, last year's survey, there was that survey last year about the C++ survey last year. Yeah. That yielded all this, package management. We want package management, but it was self-selecting, and I wonder if a professional piece of research would be enlightening in this regard. Sorry, I'm drifting off topic here.
No, it's okay.
No, but I see kind of glimpses of this, and the companies I've been brought in to do training at. You have 30 people in a room, and one person watches CppCon videos and is familiar with what's going on and has brought in the trainer. The other 29 people are just doing their jobs with the tools that they're told they're allowed to use.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have plenty of colleagues outside of the games industry who are in this position. All they can do is, use what comes out of the box. I've written a blog post about, the batteries not included blog post about, what should go in the standard library. There was a flurry of them just before Jacksonville. And this was my reasoning for why we should have graphics is so that we have graphics. So that, everyone has graphics and everyone has the same graphics because it's in the standard. And it's not just that compression, encryption, all of these things are third-party libraries. The assumption is, I can just go to this third-party library. Well, maybe you can't. Maybe you're not allowed to. I know loads of people who've had to implement, your standard, SHA routines just from the description of it. They've had to re-implement it with all the, with all the bugs that are attendant on that, because they're not allowed to use third-party implementations. That's madness. It doesn't serve us. It doesn't serve our community. It doesn't serve the growth of C++.
You mentioned also linear algebra being part of the 2D graphics proposal. Is there any chance of components of 2D graphics, like linear algebra, making it into the standard separately?
Well, it's funny you should ask that, because as it happens, I'm already co-authoring a proposal focusing on the linear algebra with Bob Stiegel.
Okay.
So finally, native support for quaternions, hurrah! We're optimistic that we'll have something to present at the next committee meeting in San Diego at the end of the year. And once that's in, we can withdraw that from the TS. It'll shrink the TS a little bit. And one of the advantages of following the BSI TS process is we're defining the rules. We can meet as often as we want. We can review when we like. And we're able to rebase the TS as the standard moves forward. We can, publish TS version 2, TS version 3. And once we've done linear algebra, we've then got, a coordinate system and a space system, so we could do the geometry section next. I'd love to get color in, just so that we can standardize colored text app. We can't even emulate a VT100 terminal in C++, which, well, anyway. And then, maybe the windowing could follow after that, although, without API to put anything on a window, I think it would be a bit redundant. And it will start getting harder. I think there are certainly several chunks I can pull out, but the further along we go, the closer we get to saying, well, I'm afraid it's going to have to be the rest of the TS or nothing. But certainly, I think there's scope for minimizing the TS by putting chunks in. But one point that I did make at Rapperswil was that, as Bjarne is very fond of saying, designing systems in isolation is never a good idea. One thing about the TS is that it gives us linear algebra and geometry and color with a purpose, with a common purpose. We know what it's for. The constraints are each component constrains each other by what it has to do. So we end up with the full set of the full library required to do that job. Yes, we will. I'm sure bring more stuff in.
Well, since you're currently authoring this paper on the linear algebra and hoping to bring that in San Diego, you said, right?
Yeah.
I have to ask, are you out of the gate making sure that everything that could be constexpr is constexpr?
Yep. I've just written an implementation of so we have two classes, the algebraic vector and the algebraic matrix, because vector is already used. It's you have no idea how annoying it was. The first time I encountered std vector, I thought, no, hang on. Anyway, we put algebraic vector, algebraic matrix. I've done an implementation of both of those. Every function is constexpr, or at least will be in C++20, because all the implementations do use some of the algorithms which are newly constexpr.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah. But yes, it is fully constexpr. The vector and the matrix are class templates over their size and over an implementation of whether they should be float or double or any other maths type that might emerge in the future. You'll love it, Jason. You really will. You really, really will, if you know anything about linear algebra.
No, I know very well. I know what I was required to know to get my degree in computer science, which was approximately 18 years ago now that I graduated.
Wow! So you'll be right on top of this then. It'll be great. You'll love it. You will. I'll come back. I'll come back and talk about it later in the year, and I'll tell you all about quaternions then as well.
Okay.
And any updates on the ring buffer proposal? I think that was one of the things we talked to you a lot about when we had you on the first time.
I'm sorry, but you just cut out there. Would you like to say that again?
Yeah. Any updates on the ring buffer proposal? I think we talked a lot about that when we had you on the first time.
Yes, the ring buffer proposal is alive and kicking. At Jacksonville in the spring, the concurrency study group affirmed their interest in waking it up again. Originally, it was stymied because it seemed too much like concurrent queue, which is a proposal that I think Lawrence Kraull was putting forward. Now, I highlighted the important differences between the two, particularly for the embedded community. My ring buffer is fixed size, no allocation, and concurrent, and lock-free. Now, obviously, I'm a busy person, and I'm getting busier, but I'm keen to get it into the standard because I need it for something else quite significant that I'm collaborating on for standardization, which I'm not ready to talk about yet. But again, I'll come back and talk to you about that as well.
Well, you are just busy with all of the things in the standard at the moment.
I'm all the busy. And I'm raising kids as well, and I'm learning piano. I'm doing my piano grades at the moment. They're great. Time? Who needs time? I don't watch telly. I'll tell you that much. I watch 2 hours of television a week.
Which 2 hours is it then?
Right now, I'm watching The Handmaid's Tale.
Okay.
And I'm watching Flight of the Conchords because I didn't watch it first time around. And it's great. Okay. It's still fun. I like it.
I haven't seen either of those things. I was expecting you to say Dancing with the Stars, honestly.
Well, my stepdaughter was trying to get me to watch Queer Eye for the Straight Guy.
Is that... Oh, that's back on again,
it's
right?
A reboot, yes. So I might get into that. I enjoyed it first time round.
And are you going to be at CppCon this year, giving any talks?
I am. I'm going to be talking about graphics, believe it or not, just to change things up a bit. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm going there along with several folk from the Hash Include Discord channel. We'll probably do something. Look out for the stickers. I'm going to be talking about this TS. Also, Mike McLaughlin's going to be with me. I'm hoping Mike McLaughlin's going to be with me as well. I've been doing all the talking, really. It's been all me for the past couple of years. And I don't want to be... he needs his moment in the sun. It's his work. He's done, as I say, he's done so much of this work. He needs to be out there talking about it as well and promoting it. People need to recognise, who the people are to talk to. So I'll be talking about the TS. And it'll be great to catch up. I wasn't there last year as it was my 50th birthday. And the graphics proposal also wasn't ready for discussion. It's my 51st birthday this time. I'll be celebrating with anybody who wants to spend an evening with an aging, tipsy English mathematician. I'll be delighted to celebrate with you. Apparently, English mathematicians are the most feared species in this part of the galaxy, according to Douglas Adams.
Okay. Well, Guy, it's been great talking to you again today. Look forward to seeing you at CppCon this year and hearing more about the stuff you're working on when you're ready to announce it.
Great. Thanks for having me. Anytime.
Yeah, thanks for coming back on.
Thanks so much for listening in as we chat about C++. I'd love to hear what you think of the podcast. Please let me know if we're discussing the stuff you're interested in. Or if you have a suggestion for a topic, I'd love to hear about that too. You can email all your thoughts to feedback@cppcast.com. I'd also appreciate if you like CppCast on Facebook and follow CppCast on Twitter. You can also follow me at Rob W. Irving and Jason at LeftKiss on Twitter. And of course, you can find all that info and the show notes on the podcast website at CppCast.com. Theme music for this episode is provided by podcastthemes.com. Website at CppCast.com. Theme music for this episode is provided by podcastthemes.com.